So we have a spiritual conversation to have, a spiritual exploration, and it's around the idea of independence and interdependence. So the educator and author and businessman that we all know, Stephen Covey, in 7 Habits of Highly Effective People, talks about the journey of effectiveness as moving from dependence to independence to interdependence. And he talks about it as being this idea that interdependence is a paradigm of we, not I. That it's about multiple people, he says, being mutually dependent upon one another. So, what do we think about independence and interdependence?
So I'm going to take the first crack at it, and then Erin will take the second crack at it. And thank you, Erin, for stealing everything I was going to talk about. So that's done me a huge favor. I appreciate that. Actually, this has been on my mind because I actually had a small debate with my brother about this. He's an advocate for people that have been, specifically children that have been injured by medical malpractice. And so he's very big on the voice of those that don't have a voice and helping people speak that are not being heard. And so we were having this debate. He said, no, we are in an era of independence. We need to fight to have our voices heard. We need to look at the individual needs. We need to look at who's being suffered on the individual level so we make sure their needs are getting met. And I said, I totally disagree. I think people are not being heard because we're thinking of ourselves as individuals, because we're not looking at our interconnectedness. And we went back and forth about it and agreed to disagree. But interdependence, think about that. The dependence on 2 or more people or things on each other. Independence is dependence on myself. Interdependence is dependence on 2 or more things upon each other. And there's a time, I believe, actually for each. I believe that as the individual level, there's a time in your life when you should really be focusing on your independence. I also believe there's a time when you should be focusing on the interdependence. I believe that's true for companies and cultures as well, that they go through this pendulum cycle of when they might need to focus on one or the other. And you think about sort of a child when they leave home to go out maybe to college or they've turned 18, they're going out into the world. That's really a time that we celebrate. It's time for that child to claim their independence, to claim sort of life as their own, to discover the world from their perspective. But at the same time, you realize if that child gets too wrapped up in the idea of independence, they might really struggle in the world because they don't find that they need to reach out for help when they need it. They don't call home when they're struggling with something in their life. They don't build a tribe when they go to college or to school or whatever it might be to be able to lean on people around them for study groups or to help with whatever it might be or financially. And I'd actually run into this at Uni of Las Vegas. You can imagine Las Vegas, there's a large homeless population. A lot of people, no joke, go there, gamble, lose their entire life savings, and are now trapped in Las Vegas. And we would get these phone calls. And people would say, I've got no money, I've got nothing, I've lost my car, I've lost everything. And I'd say, what church do you go to? And they say, I don't go to church. And I said, well, where's your family? Well, we've kind of separated. We've gone our different ways. I said, I think I know the problem. You have to be building a community of people around you. You have to find those connections of interdependence to be able to help each other. Church is one of those things. Spiritual community is one of those things where you build those connections so when life gets difficult, you have those people, those communities to lean on. So I've been looking at the unity movement. That's my job, believe it or not. I do that on a daily basis, and as my wife can attest to, I come home and I crash because all I want to do is figure out how to make unity thrive. That's my single thought. Thank you. That is my single utmost thought throughout my entire job during the day, and even while I get home, I can never turn it off. How do you make unity thrive? So I've studied unity since I was a child. I grew up in a unity home. My father and mother was ministers. I grew up in the church. And I've been looking at it through the Unity Youth Program my entire life, studying what's going on in unity. And as an adult, I've looked back on it. When we were really thriving, when things got difficult, what was going on. And as I became a minister, I actually learned about something called the glass ceiling in terms of unity ministers. And they talk about a single unity minister can handle about 100 congregants. And when that minister reaches about 100 congregants, they tap out. they can't really give any more time and energy to get to 150 or 200 or 300 or 400 congregants. They call it the glass ceiling. And if that minister doesn't have the tools or the mindset to start training another person to help them, start training another minister or co-leader or assistant, they will not break that glass ceiling of about 80 to 100 people. And you actually see that glass ceiling all across our movement. That's about the cap for a lot of our unity ministries. We've hit that glass ceiling. And I mention that because that is an issue for all of us. And so when I talked about these issues show up on the individual, and they show up in the business, and they show up in the culture, I was thinking about this glass ceiling in our entire movement. So just out of curiosity, anybody in the front row is not allowed to answer this question. How many ministries do you think we have around the world, unity ministries? And just throw out a number. 900. 3,000. 600. 600 ministries around the world. Now, 900 actually was the number people thought for a very long time. And then there was a reclassification on what was considered a prayer group and what was considered a ministry, and they changed that. So it wasn't that we lost 300 churches all of a sudden, we just reclassified. So we have around 600 ministries around the world. We have them in Africa, we have them in Australia, we have them in Europe, we have them all over the world. And so I think back on, well, we're a growing movement, and we're actually relatively small in terms of denominations. We don't call ourselves a denomination, but in many ways we act like a denomination. So I think about in the early days when the Fillmores were doing what they were doing in around the 1910s, 20s, 30s, prayer groups were popping up around the world, and they're starting to become ministries. They're starting to formalize into ministries. And there was no formalized process at that time to plant a ministry per se. Most of it was a prayer group would start in an area. They would contact the home office. They'd say, hey, we'd like to formalize this process, and they would grow into a ministry. Well, I thought about this glass ceiling concept, that maybe around 100 ministries, we needed a formalized process, and we didn't come up with one. And the Fillmores passed on, and they went their way. And that would have been what was sort of the core formalized process, if one existed at that time, was what they foresaw for ministries to be developed around the world. But I'm trying to find the sweet spot for my antenna here. It's somewhere right around in here, I think. So this is my jam right here. I'm going to work this zone. I'm also a sound engineer, so my mind's always analyzing what's happening with my sound. Anyway, so what if we hit the glass ceiling? Now we're at 600 ministries. And certainly you could grow beyond 100 congregants as a single minister, but you may not be serving them as well as you should. They might be on the outskirts, or they might not be getting the attention they should, or the one-on-one time that they should, because, nope, it's right here. Don't step forward. This is my jam, right here, right here. Stay in the pocket, just like a jazz musician. So I'm looking at it from the movement's perspective, and I see we lacked a formalized process to help ministries succeed. They were going out and they were independent. And actually today, if you go around and talk through to different ministers throughout our movement, we really thrive on the idea that each ministry is an independently owned and operated ministry, which is great in many ways because it can then sort of pivot, it can do what it needs to do to serve its specific community. But it really hurts us in a way in that there's not a cohesiveness. So we had this idea of independence as we were planting these churches because they had to, because they were starting on their own in the middle of nowhere, and they had to come up with a concept of how to do church, and they did it, and they reached out, and they would say, yeah, you're a church, do your thing. We don't have much to support you. Good luck. But today, now we have all these churches around the world that kind of sprouted out of that same concept, and they need help. And they need each other. And right now, a lot of them are really struggling because the world is shifting so fast. And you're really grateful, you should be grateful for what you have here because you have an incredible building and you actually have a technology team that's keeping up with the pace, but a lot of churches don't have that. They have one minister, which was me when I was at Unity of Las Vegas, trying to do it all, and you just can't. So they need help. So I believe from where I'm looking at our movement today and each church itself and ministry itself, we are in a phase where we need to get back to interdependence, which means we are all starting to help each other. So what does that actually look like? It means, in some ways, giving up our stronghold on our independence. The idea that we do our thing, and whatever you're doing, that's your thing, don't mess with our thing. This is ours. This is what we do. This is our jam. I'm gonna make an example here to prove my point. Don't step too far forward. I bet if I asked you in the room right now to define unity, I would not get two definitions that sounded the same. You might say, well, what's wrong with that? We come up with our own definitions. Well, the problem with that is, suppose you go out to talk to your friends about unity, and you tell them it's one thing, and they talk to someone else, and they hear about unity, and they tell them it's another thing, and they talk to someone else, and then they see an ad that my organization puts out on behalf, and it says something else. They don't know what unity is, which in some ways speaks to maybe we don't really know what unity is. We feel what unity is, we know what it is in our core, but maybe we don't necessarily have the verbiage or the strategy for talking unity. Has anyone ever struggled describing unity to a friend or a coworker or a colleague or something like that? That's a problem. That's a big problem because the best form of advertising is what? Word of mouth. If we don't know how to speak unity, how do we expect to ever use that platform to bring people in? Word of mouth, which is the most effective way to bring people into the movement. Now, that's not to say that we're the most important thing on the planet, and we should make sure everyone's here, but I feel personally that what we have is what is needed in the world today. And the way we go about it and the way we transform people's lives, not for themselves, but for their community and the betterment of all things, that is important, and we need that today. But if we continue to try to go out at it as individuals and say, I have my own little definition, I have my own little way of describing it, I sit in my own little isolated box, I think it hurts us, and I think it has hurt us probably, I'm going to say probably from the 60s on. I think with the Fillmores around, they held on to that core that we all drew from. I think as they passed, we sort of lost that core, and we kind of did the stray cat thing and all headed in our own direction. A unified message, a unified way of approaching things, a unified way of talking, a unified message, a unified voice in the world, that gives people something to hold on to. If they hear a radio ad or they see something on Facebook or they run to a friend and they hear the same congruent message, because we all know you have to hear something at least 7 times before you understand it. And if you hear it 7 different ways 7 times, that's not going to help you. So I'm really working in this position towards interdependence. I think we should all be leaning on each other. I think every ministry within a city should be working together towards success. I've worked with ministries that talk about, we've got this ministry down the road, it's also a unity, and they're taking our congregants. I go, you've got 80 people attending your service? Yeah. How many people in your city? 400,000. You think out of 400,000 people, there's only 80 that are interested in unity. That's a problem. That's a consciousness problem. I think in a city of 400,000 people, you should be able to have 10 thriving unity ministries. That's how many people are looking for what we have. But when we have a competitive mindset, that puts that out into the collective consciousness that we're fear-based, not authentic, and we hurt ourselves, and people pick up on that. So there's a time and a season. I think there was a time where independence really served us as a movement. I think it serves us as individuals. I think it serves companies. I think it serves communities. But I think that independence can lead to selfishness when it is not coupled with interdependence. And I think we've seen that through the last few decades. I think that's what spawns classism. I think that's what spawns racism. I think that's what spawns bigotry. All the things we're seeing because we thought, I'm okay. I took care of myself. My things are good. Your things are yours to worry about. And that's why we have the world we have today. Because of this concept of mine, myself, my independence. I'm standing on my laurels. I pulled up my bootstraps. I made my way. And I didn't concern myself with lifting up those around me on the journey. So I'm going to leave you with that thought and invite Erin up to take us to the next level. Reverend Erin, that is.
Thank you. So it's funny that you bring that up because Reverend Randy Fickey and I have had great conversations around this idea of competition rather than cooperation, because at the heart of unity and the teachings, I think we believe in cooperation, we believe in support. And we had this funny conversation where somehow in our talking about navigating this last year and a half and how can I support you, what are you doing, it came up and he mentioned that some of our folks were over there and kind of like, but don't tell Reverend Erin. And I said, honey, you tell any of our folks that are over there that they are called to be wherever their hearts lead them on a Sunday morning, and that I appreciate that we're doing things differently so everyone has the option for going to what meets their own needs. So you tell them that's good with both of us because we are a united front. There's no need to compartmentalize or make something smaller than it needs to be. When we talk about independence and interdependence, if we are talking about a conversation that limits something, that says, how about even less? How about even less of us come? How about even less of us do that? If the conversation doesn't encompass and become greater, then we're thinking too small. Then we're not inside the realm of divine ideas and godness, because godness is never having small conversations that separate us or pick us off or leave us out, right? There is more than enough all of the time. So this outdated evolutionary idea of survival of the fittest, well, it's not about that. And in fact, newer research has shown that it's really not about survival of the fittest. It's about survival of the most cooperative. It's survival of the most adaptable, right? It's awakening that place in ourselves where we realize, in truth, unity. You know, we've said so many times, and it's been said throughout history, that Charles and Myrtle intuited the perfect idea of a name for a spiritual movement, unity, because it just stops there. And in fact, you know, the name, as Shad was saying, you know, defining ourselves, the name is almost our definition, right? Like, you can't say the word unity without kind of giving a little voice to what we probably are, right? Because we come from that consciousness. Even our bodies have a system for letting go of the small nature that wants to limit or wants to be selfish or wants to be like, I'm gonna grow and grow myself. I'm gonna get, and you don't get any. I call it apoptosis. I think I say it wrong. I usually say apoptosis, but apoptosis. And it's about suicidal cells in your body that are designed to disintegrate if they are being too selfish. So when cells do that, when there's too many that are growing, just me, the body self-regulates. The body finds its way back to homeostasis by this programmed cell death saying, that's not cooperative enough. You're not cooperating with the system. You're not co-creating. You're not living in unity. So there's so many ways to have this conversation, this exploration. But the important thing is that in this movement that we call unity, in this spiritual center, there is more than enough room for all of us. Yeah? Amen? There's more than enough room for all of us. And we're here to do something that is greater than just ourselves. You know, a conversation I've had with people in the past, and I was just supporting another minister in the field in a diversity conversation with some challenges that are coming up. And so I brought up some just analogies from my experience with spiritual community. And what I shared was this. You know, in that time, I think we've grown through it, but one of the things in our movement that's interesting that I think keeps our movement a little bit on the tiny side is often the music. Most unity churches, I would say, if you look at that 600 number, and if you queried the music in the 600 number, a lot of the music is the same music 10, 20, 30, 40, 50, 60, 70, 80 years ago. And that can be fun, right? I mean, I can sit here and I am free, I am unlimited, there are no chains that bind me. I am free, I am unlimited right now. Unity Classic. But what can you do with that classic? Can you take that and then start, I am free, I am unlimited, there are no chains that bind me. And can you move it into right now? Right? Erin is a singer. She is a performer. She is someone that embraces and embodies music and sound. She knows about lifting something into movement, right? So that history is great. But if we stay stuck in something that when 98% of the people come in the door, the music hasn't moved with the times and they can't feel it, and they go, that's okay, but like, what is this? Or that's cheesy, or that's whatever. Music is a language. It needs to meet people where they are. And when we can take that shift, we can embody something that meets most people, but not everyone. So the analogy I gave her, the story I gave her, was someone coming up to me at a service, very upset that we don't have, I think this was when we took the hymn books out of the sanctuary. And I know I'm probably going to get some letters about putting the hymn books back in. It's like, oh yeah, the hymn books, they're gone. Give them back. But we took the hymn books out. We can still do hymns because we have other modes of doing that. But they came up and said, we should really be doing classical music. It should all be quiet and gentle, and it should be all the old school stuff. And this just isn't unity if we don't do that. And I've been around for a really long time. And I know this is how it needs to be. And I just took a deep breath, presencing, and just knowing that heart opening, because I get that. I get that we've had experiences of walking into a sanctuary with that beautiful, quiet, old school music, right? And what that does for us, and how that gentleness and that consciousness lifts our field. But this is a person that had been around a long time, has read every book, has gone to every sermon, has seen every minister. And I just said, I get that feeds you and that serves you. And how long have you been here? And you've read all the stuff, you've listened to the sermons, so you've got this, right? You've got the unity message. You've got everything that it has to offer. Now it's just about you continually growing with it and applying it in your life, yeah? And I said, is it worth it for you to have the music the way you need it when you've already got that message, if it is going to keep 90% of people under 40 out of this church, out of this spiritual community? If it's going to have them walk in and have them walk away? Or are you willing to lift up that need, since you've had so much time having your needs met? Are you willing to go into service for someone else so that we can support others who have not had this message yet and might not experience it if it's brought to them in that context? And there was a softness. I hope there was an understanding. There was a seeing of like, yeah, so maybe it's not about me having all my boxes checked and having everything exactly the way I want to have it. Because we have an incredible spiritual community here. It is incredible. We have an incredible movement. We have an incredible message, do we not? It's incredible. It saves lives. It helps people be on purpose and not waste the life that they have, which we know in truth that can never happen, but gosh, life can be hard, can't it? We can make it really hard. And there's just something about unity, right? That helps you interact with that in a way that just lifts us up. So we have live streamers in Detroit, Michigan, who came to us and in this last year and a half have felt like, because the problem a year and a half ago was that this spiritual sanctuary, we always said it was without walls, but it went out, right? It went out. But the problem was it never invited people back in. So if you didn't live here, right, you could view, you could watch, you could receive the message, but you couldn't interact, you couldn't be present. Do you know I just walked through the hospice experience and the lifting off of one of our beloved congregants, and our friends in Detroit knew about, because of the interaction now, because about the back and forth, because they've been invited into the heart of the community, not just the message, but the people. They've been invited into the people. So they saw what was going on, and they felt just as much a part of this community as anyone sitting in a seat here today. On Facebook, you guys let me know. Do you feel like that? Because we want to make you feel like that more and more. That's our vision. That's our goal. And you know what they did? They bought meals for this family. And I got to come to this family who was feeling isolated, who was feeling alone, who is at the bottom of the bottom, looking at 27 years of marriage and thinking, this is where I am now. And, the bottom of feeling isolated and alone. And what were they shown? They were shown that even your beloveds, all the way out there in Michigan, they're right here with you. They're in your home feeding you. They are making sure that you know in this time God is alive and well. In and through and as us and in and through as that community. Isn't that power? We are big enough to ideate what will take that and expand it. What will take that and expand it. And offer it out to more and more people, because I can't imagine being plopped down in a city, not my city, my town, or not anyone across the country, and not have the like-minded consciousness of unity people. I can't imagine how different it would feel to not have this conversation, this connection, to not have like the hope that I'm given when I see that you're in this sanctuary, when I see that you're on Facebook, you're in the Zoom room, you're online, you're here, and what that tells me about your mind and your heart and your consciousness and who you are and who you're here to be. And that makes me feel safe. That makes me feel interconnected in a way that it's like I want to be interconnected. Right? Because there's interdependence and there's independence, and sometimes interdependence cannot be so pretty when we're interdependent with something that feels like it's harming us, right? Stephen Covey actually goes into this idea of interdependence and says that it's important to have independence, to kind of have self-actualized independence on the way to interdependence. Right? So that each system, each person, each operation is coming from a whole and healthy place, right? I'm not interdependent because I'm not, whole. I'm interdependent because I am more whole when I am. So I am bringing my wholeness and then creating more. Covey says this: life by nature is highly interdependent. Trying to achieve maximum effectiveness through independence is like trying to play tennis with a golf club. The tool is not suited to the reality. Interdependence is far more mature, more advanced concept. If I am physically interdependent, I am self-reliant and capable, but I also realize that you and I are working together, and together we can accomplish far more than even at my best I could accomplish alone. If I am emotionally interdependent, I derive a great sense of worth within myself, but I also recognize the need for love, for giving, for receiving love from others. If I am intellectually interdependent, I realize that I need the best thinking of other people to join with my own. As an interdependent person, I have the opportunity to share myself deeply, meaningfully with others. And I have access to the vast resources and potential of other human beings. I often think of posts. I have imaginary Facebook posts that I don't do, and I think I probably have my job because I post about 1% of the things that come to my mind. But I always think about this whenever I have moments when I'm like, oh, it's a lot. It's a lot having a full-time job. It's a lot having a tot. It's a lot living in a place where I don't have family members, right? It's a lot. When I do that and then I'm going and I'm doing the dishes or I'm opening the refrigerator or going to the store, whatever it is, I think of these imaginary posts and I think of saying, if someone made you dinner tonight, thank them. If someone moved your laundry from the washer to the dryer, thank them. If someone took out the trash or recycling, for the love of Mary, thank them. If someone fixed something in your home, thank them. Because living solo or living in a silo is hard. But here's the key. None of us do it. None of us do it. I used to say this. I've gone through my relationship life and thought, as far as unity principles, the law of mind action, what am I doing? It's a very interesting experience. And we all have our own growth experience where we're just like, I am still trying to listen. But I used to say this. I used to say, I don't need a man. I want one. I don't need a man in my life. I want one. Not exactly true. I think I do need a man in my life. Probably I need more than one of them. And if you think, it's the opposite of Mormonism, who's on board with me? But probably if we sit here and we think we can do it all, by ourselves, and this idea of our culture, our U.S. American culture, right, thinking we can be in the workforce, and we can also be a mom and a family person and do this, and we can do that, and we can do that. This is not going to sound very feminist, but I actually think it is. It's an illusion. It's an illusion that we can do it all ourselves, period. I am not an island, and the second I try to make myself an island, everything around me will be toxic. Because if we think we're doing it alone, there's someone we're not appreciating. Because I have people that have stepped into my life that are like family, that are friendships, that are there, that support. Because we are not islands. So if we find ourselves in places like we're looking at the unity movement and saying, this doesn't feel like it's growing, expand your island, get off the island, step off the island, and step out of these paradigms that keep giving us the illusion, that are archaic, but keep giving us the illusion that we can somehow do everything on our own. We are tribal creatures. I remember one of my earliest little school projects was the difference between cats and dogs, and it's like one of them had a pack, and the other one was more independent. We're pack animals, humans. Now, the size of the packs, can fluctuate, but we need each other. We've seen this even in the pandemic, the role of teachers, this illusion that teachers and schools are only there to educate our children. Well, that's not what we've been operating like, and we just proved that. We just proved that their value is not just in their education of our children. We have shown that they actually make the family system work. We are shown that they are an integral and an incredible part of allowing people to have careers and jobs. We have shown that, in fact, having two adults or whatever the family situation it is, if someone is a parent, in the workplace, that doesn't always work unless there's someone else giving that we're not talking about, whether it's a grandparent, whether it's a care worker, whether it's the school system. So it's time for us, I think, collectively to just take a deep breath into that. This idea of unity, this idea of oneness, and really balance it with independence. It doesn't have to take away our independence. In fact, we're called to fully actualize our independence. And this is truth, because truth is where you can't take an analogy too far or it disintegrates. You got to sit with it. You have to have the spiritual maturity to be able to see that if you go too far, it'll conflict, but that we have the height of independence and we have the height of interdependence. And in fact, they are the yin and the yang, and they move together and they work together. So let us free ourselves on this Independence Day from these evolutional myths. And let's acknowledge that we are swimming in a sea of oneness. It can be ignored, but it can only be ignored till we feel it acutely. We are one. In the words of David White, the author of Crossing the Unknown Sea, He says this, he speaks to the delusion of self-sufficiency, and he says, "We would stand barely a chance in the world if we did not rely from cradle to grave on what has been handed to us from those who have lived and worked before us. From agriculture to healthcare, from education to sanitation, we are the recipients of generations of toil." Well, I believe that we are also the recipients of sacrifice for the greater good, of service to the greater good, of getting out of our own self-centered needs into what is for the greater goods. But we also inherit the effects of greed and ignorance, isolation. So where are we, and what are we going to do about it? He makes this poetic observation. He says, whatever powers we have in the world, in our work and in our lives, in our powers of leadership, in our imaginations, they are the gift of a much larger world than the one we have made for ourselves. They are only a part of deeper, inescapable, ancestral imaginings which we join and which inform our every day, into which every next day we introduce our own children. Namaste.